Google is shutting down its in-house Stadia software development teams. In a move that is surprising to absolutely no one, Google's two in-house game development studios in LA and Montreal are closing their doors for good, throwing Google's foray into the video game market into complete disarray. As part of Stadia Games and Entertainment, the two now shut down Google-owned studios were originally responsible for creating exclusive games for Stadia, which was Google's attempt at a Netflix for games style of video game streaming service that released in late 2019. The two Google studios plan to release exclusive software meant to entice new customers into using Stadia, but now these goals have been completely dashed because with the closures, Stadia will only feature third-party titles for the foreseeable future. In other words, Google Stadia will exclusively host non-exclusive games. In a press release, Stadia VP and GM Phil Harrison further explained Google's rationale for closing its in-house game development studios. To quote, "Creating best-in-class games from the ground up takes many years and significant investment, and the cost is going up exponentially. Given our focus on building on the proven technology of Stadia, as well as deepening our business partnerships, we've decided that we will not be investing further in bringing exclusive content from our internal development team, SG&E. End quote. Well, that's underwhelming. This move is not surprising to anyone that's paid attention to Google Stadia since before its launch in late 2019. Even before it was announced, Stadia's goal of being a Netflix-style video game streaming service was always going to be an uphill battle. After all, Google has a lot of competition in the form of Microsoft and Sony, which are two corporate entities that have been firmly entrenched in the video game business for decades. And in order to be a success, Stadia needed to compete with these industry heavy hitters. It needed big launch numbers and glowing reviews. It needed to be good. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Stadia received mixed reviews at launch and has had underwhelming user analytics over the past year, and when looking under the hood, it's easy to see why. To be blunt, Stadia was a horribly executed project from the outset. As far as supposedly being a cutting-edge piece of technology that allows you to stream video games, Stadia is very spotty. Even with a great internet connection, there is an input delay that lessens the quality of the game you are playing, and if you're one of the poor unfortunate souls that have a bad internet connection, which many people in America do, Stadia just doesn't work all that well, especially when compared to a physical or downloaded game. Stadia just is not an optimal video game experience. And when you factor in its horrendous business model, Stadia's problems are compounded. Business-wise, Google Stadia is a bad deal for customers. While Stadia has two different tiers you can use, one being free and the other being the monthly paid Stadia Pro subscription, both tiers feature significant drawbacks and caveats. To quickly sum them up, the free tier streams games in lower quality, all while the Pro tier provides high functionality in exchange for a monthly subscription fee, which on its own doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it is problematic for reasons I'm about to explain. Making matters worse, most games on Stadia are not free to stream. In fact, the opposite is true. Regardless of tier, players have to purchase the games themselves as well. Despite the subscription fee, the paltry amount of free games available, and how the streaming technology isn't as good as actually owning a game, titles are full price in the Stadia store, meaning that even with a Pro subscription, you still have to pay a monthly subscription fee for the privilege of buying a game full price that is still shittier compared to a physical or downloaded version. It is not a great sales pitch. As far as everything is concerned, Google Stadia is Google shit. This ultimately brings us back to Google's recent closure of its two in-house game development studios. With its functional issues and terrible business model, the only thing that Stadia potentially had going for it was the possibility of exclusive software. After all, conventional wisdom states that video game platforms need exclusive games to thrive. Whether they be hardware manufacturers or online storefronts and services, exclusive games can drive people into using a specific console or service, though whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is up for debate. Yet, the closure of Google's in-house video game development studios runs counter to this proven fact. If anything, it represents a company signaling defeat. They are essentially waving the white flag on this whole project. Through the studio closures, Google has immediately devalued Stadia both as a service and a platform, because it won't have any exclusive games for it in the future. If anything, Stadia doesn't have anything going for it now, which means its eventual demise is now solidified, because there's absolutely no reason why anyone should invest in this platform at all. Google Stadia is essentially dead, and while Google might not admit this fact to themselves or to their shareholders especially, the fact that it started its death procession is undeniable, and there is precedent here. Stadia's failure models many other Google product misfires from the past 15 years. Since the company's inception, Google has in the past tried to make bold forays into various tech and software sectors, often to catastrophic results. For just a few examples, they removed their small-scale job recruiter service called Hire, they killed the Focal smart glasses line, and the social media site Google Plus was axed, and there are just numerous other canceled product lines. Hell, Google has trashed so many apps, products, and services over the years that there is an entire website dedicated to extensively detailing and documenting all of these failed ideas. And Stadia appears to be just yet another Google casualty, another mismanaged blunder by a company that routinely produces mismanaged blunders. Whatever the case, Stadia just seems to be another Google failure, which is just sad, to be perfectly honest with you. Of course, Stadia's failure doesn't happen in a vacuum, though it does suck. While it's fun to point out how inept Google is as a corporate entity, there is a human cost to how badly Google botched Stadia. As a result of the closures of both Stadia games and entertainment studios, many workers and people's livelihoods have been upended. Roughly 150 people will either lose their jobs or be reshuffled into Google's corporate structure somewhere. But either way, the situation is not optimal for those whose lives are directly affected. People who have to figure out their own way as their careers are put into jeopardy. Hell, even Google Vice President and game industry veteran Jade Raymond is leaving Google due to Stadia's rough outing, because the situation really is that dire for Stadia. The service may not be dead yet, but its days are numbered. In its current state, Stadia is just shambling along without realizing that its foot is already in the grave. And with that, I want to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones and Slasher of Veils, Mom, David Devlin, and Miles Nelson. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. I love y'all.